Cop killers are now more prevalent than ever. They ruthlessly kill without thinking of the consequences and the people they hurt in the process. It is shocking how far they go. Here are 4 cop killers who were sentenced to life in prison. Number 4, Tyrus Matthews. Corporal Matthew Edwards was shot 6 times and murdered on July 23, 2010. He was killed while responding to reports of a burglary in progress on Pine Street. He and his partner were responding to a breaking and entering 911 call. They met with the suspect, who matched the description. He was speaking to the suspect Tyrus when he suddenly shot him 6 times using a handgun. Tyrus Matthews, the convicted felon, continued to deny all allegations even after overwhelming evidence was presented at the court. Corporal Edwards' wife, Shannon, devastated, said in tears, "Because my husband never got to finish his shift and come home to me and our children," she continues, "I find peace in the promise that God has given us, that one glad day that all 4 of us will be reunited in heaven." Matthew was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder in November 2011 and sentenced to life without parole. Corporal Edwards left behind a wife with whom he had 2 children. Number 3, Marco Parrilla. The 27-year-old Marco Parrilla had shot and killed Officer Charles Condick, who had responded to a noise complaint and arrived on the scene. Parrilla at the time had already served a 3-year sentence for a list of charges that included selling cocaine and marijuana and leaving the scene of a crash that involved an injury. He was also wanted for probation violation. Officer Condick had found Parrilla sitting in the car. Parrilla then proceeded to shoot the officer 7 times with a .40 caliber gun that was stolen. One of the shots had hit Condick above the bulletproof vest, effectively wounding him. Parrilla went as far as backing on Condick with his cart. He was found not long after he fled the scene as he had crashed his car into a pole. Condick died an hour later in a nearby hospital. He was a father of 7, happily married to his wife, Teresa. To lessen his sentence, Parrilla pleaded guilty to all charges. The next day, the jury decided on the verdict. Parrilla was given a death sentence. That aroused cheers from the courtroom, including Condick's family, colleagues, and many supporters. But only moments later, prosecutors and defense attorneys huddled before the judge's bench. A death sentence was what was read aloud. However, as later understood, there was an error in the verdict form. The judge asked the jury to rewrite a new form. When they returned, 1 had chosen the death penalty and 2 voted for a life sentence. The judges asked them to confirm that they had chosen as per the original first verdict form. Because the votes weren't unanimous, Parrilla was automatically sentenced to life in prison, which devastated those in the courtroom. Number 2, Kyle Williams. According to court records, Officer Crispin of Lakeland PD was shot in the top of the head on December 18, 2011. Kyle Williams was arrested and convicted of first-degree murder only in August 2014. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Several witness statements came in after the arrest of teenagers, telling the police that the officer had stopped the trio of young men and asked them what they were doing. One of them had pulled out a gun and then pulled the trigger. It was testified during the trial by several young men who were with Williams that night that it was he who pulled the trigger. The Crispin family had been hoping for a death sentence but were utterly disappointed by the verdict. Nevertheless, they chose to find closure because the killer would spend the rest of his life in prison. Number 1, Quentin Smith. Officers Eric Joring and Anthony Morelli were murdered on February 10, 2018 in Westerville, Ohio. They were responding to a domestic violence 911 call. Quentin Smith had punched and choked his wife, which led her to make the call. He had a long list of criminal activities including burglary, intimidation, aggravated menacing, domestic violence, and felonious assault. When both the police officers arrived, Smith shot Joring 3 times in both his arms and head. He died on the spot. Morelli was shot once in the chest and he died later in the hospital. Smith was also shot 5 times but survived. He was charged with 2 murders on February 11 and then transported to Franklin County Jail, where he was held without bail. Smith was tried for trial in October and November 2019. On October 30, Smith's wife and a jail inmate whom he had spoken to about the murders testified. Smith was found guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder and 1 count of domestic violence, along with 2 specifications that made him eligible for the death penalty: killing 2 police officers purposely and killing 2 or more people purposely. On November 21, Judge Richard Fry sentenced Smith to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole, along with 26.5 years of imprisonment. So, there you have it. 4 cop killers sentenced to life in prison. What do you think? Were the punishments justified? Or did they deserve the death penalty for murder? Do let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.